talking on the history of anarchism in Brazil, anarchism started in Brazil in the beginning of the 20th century through the organizing of unions. So we had a big period of time from these, from the really beginning of the 20th century up to the 30s, and this was mainly a revolutionary syndicalist movement. So the decade of 1910 was the decade of the most intense mobilizing work and this revolutionary syndicalist perspective here in Brazil. So we had a really great movement and a really big movement that could organize through different issues and organize different kind of mobilization of struggle and everything. In the 30s we had a kind of lots of different factors that contributed to this suppression of anarchism. Okay, mainly we had a law made by the government that attached the unions with the state. We had the division inside the workers' movement because the Communist Party was created. We had a big repression. We had an international context that really was important for the workers and so on. And we had an internal problem. So all of these problems, I said, was external problems. But we have some internal problems, and mainly just one issue. We consider that the anarchists in this revolutionary syndicalists perspective decided to be dissolved inside the unions. So as soon as a crisis arrived in the revolutionary syndicalist movement, it also finished with anarchism, because anarchism was just developed and was just dissolved inside the unions. So we think that there was an internal problem, and this was pointed by some Brazilian anarchists, that maybe it was, maybe it could be different if anarchists were organized specifically, because these crises that arrived in the syndicalist movement could be rethought by the anarchist organization. Because the fact is, the syndicalist movement was in a crisis, but the class struggle never ceased to exist in Brazil. So maybe these anarchists could do some different efforts and everything, but that was not done. So from this period of 1930 to 1980s, we had a really crisis period in terms of anarchism. We had some activities, so we had anarchists involved, but they were, we normally say that they were just with the small black flame, and with the small flame of anarchism being conserved. So they did some activities, they published some newspapers like Ação Direta, Direct Action, that it was an anarchist newspaper. They had some congress, some meetings and everything, but the movement was really small, and it got completely destroyed with the dictatorship that started in 1964. So anarchist was not organized. Anarchists participated anarchists had a small participation in this social movement of the 60s. Okay, some of them were repressed by the military government, but not as other socialists or other tendencies, militants that was tortured and everything. So we had some arrested militants, and some of them stayed up to a month in the jail or something, but that was not so critical as the process that some other socialists were in. So after the dictatorship starts to open, as soon as the regime starts to open, in the end of the 70s, so some initiatives start to grow. And during the 80s, we could talk on a rebirth of anarchism in Brazil. We have four mainly features, or four many groups and members or initiatives that are really important in Brazil during the end of the 70s and the beginning of the 80s. That is, in the northeast, we have a newspaper called Inimigo do Rei. It's a kind of a king enemy. They were organizing this newspaper and contacting people all over in Brazil. We had a publishing house that was founded in the 80s in Brasília, that is the city, called Novos Tempos, New Times. And they started publishing anarchism, classics and stuff like that. And the initiatives in Rio with the Círculo de Estudos Libertários, the CEL, and in São Paulo with the Centro de Cultura Social, the Social Culture Center. So all these initiatives starts to aggregate people, start to bring the discussion again and again. And in fact, during the 90s, all this movement that was coming together and was being rebuilt and reconstructed and everything, this movement starts to look each other and started to discover that in fact there was really different programs on different proposals involved in this whole anarchism that was being developed during the 80s. So the 90s was the decade that anarchism starts to separate. So our tendency, specificismo, starts to develop by 1995 by some influence of the Anarchist Federation in Uruguay, and other tendencies like individualists and anarcho-syndicalists and other initiatives start to know, okay, we have differences, and start to separate. The last experience that tried to group the whole movement was in 2000 in an encounter in a city called Florianopolis, that they discussed the proposal of forming a kind of a national synthetist federation. And the encounter was a complete collapsed, lots of fights and problems and stuff. And then after that, some initiatives got spread all over the country. To finish, I would like to talk of this tendency I'm part, so it was being developed since the 90s. One experience that was really interesting was the Organização Socialista Libertária, Libertarian Socialist Organization, that was formed in the end of the 90s. Then in the 2000, a lot of interesting experience, and the most interesting is the Fórum do Anarquismo Organizado, the Organized Anarchist Forum. Nowadays, the specificismo tendency in Brazil is organizing through this forum, okay? And our proposal is to go discussing some organization issues and program issues to form in the medium term an anarchist organization, specificist organization in Brazil. Okay, so today, what organizations are inside the forum? We have in the Northeast, Coletivo Anarquista Zumbi dos Palmares and Vermelho e Negro. Zumbi dos Palmares is from Alagoas and Vermelho e Negro from Bahia. We have in Mato Grosso, Rusga Libertária. We have in Rio Grande do Sul, the Anarchist Federation of Rio Grande do Sul, or Federação Anarquista Gaúcha. And we have the federation, the Anarchist Federation of Rio. So today, FAO is with 5 organizations. The organization I'm part here in São Paulo, the Anarchist Federation of São Paulo, is joining this process, and there are other collectives like the Class Struggle Collective in Curitiba, some other collectives like GEIPA in Joinville, something in Florianópolis, another collectives called PAEM in Mato Grosso do Sul. So all these collectives are organizing through the forum or approximating or doing some coordinated works and publication. We are publishing a newspaper called Libertário and Socialism. And then we're trying to coordinate some practical works, like people that are in unions normally have meetings to coordinate this work in the unions. People that are in communitary work try to do things together. We're trying to work and trying to develop some tendencies, organizations that it's something that unite militants of the social movements that have some practical perspectives. So we're developing this in São Paulo. We're helping to develop this here with other members and everything. It's called OPA, it's Organização Popular Aimberê, Popular Organization. They have the popular organization in Rio with other militants, the popular resistance, that is another tendency that we are in some 4 states in the country. So, and with other militants and other organizations. So in fact, we are trying to start the discussion or trying to give this continuity on these issues on organization, maybe to have a national organization in some years.